business case for criminal justice reform. Everyone at Safe and Just Michigan is thrilled that you are participating. We've muted your microphones to ensure that everyone can hear the panel, but please ask any questions you have using the chat function on Zoom. You'll find the chat function on the taskbar when you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen. For anyone who has not used Zoom before, the chat button is the one that looks like a talk balloon. At the end of the panel, we'll gather up and answer questions for as long as time allows. We'll be putting links to an exit survey and ways to get in contact with us on the screen and at the end of the panel discussion, but you will also be able to find those links during the event in the chat room. For those of you who want to revisit this discussion, we are streaming this event on Safe and Just Michigan's Facebook page through Facebook Live, and will be put up on the Safe and Just Michigan YouTube channel later. You can also engage with us on our social media channels or visit our website. We have a special guest to start off the webinar. Celia Ouellette is the CEO of our co-sponsor of the event, the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice, and she has a welcome message. Celia?
Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you, everyone. Welcome, everyone. At RBIJ, we are so pleased to partner with Safe and Just Michigan and the panelists you're just about to hear for this event and to talk about this timely and really important topic. Today, we're going to be talking about the business case for criminal justice reform. I fully recognize and respect that we have quite a number of real justice engaged business champions participating in this event and listening to this event and with us today, but also quite a few new businesses here, which is really encouraging. And those businesses we're seeing are putting in the work and really learning and understanding the role that businesses can play and could play and should play in criminal justice reform and criminal justice issues. And I want to say how really, really welcome you are too. Those that have been in this space for a long time, and you're going to be hearing from some of them today, are great guides and your biggest supporters. And they can provide really robust and well-tested blueprints and models for what good business engagement on justice looks like. Look, businesses, the advocates and campaigners need you. Businesses have undoubtedly a critical role to play in criminal justice reform, whether that's directly hiring or advocating for change or promoting policies that make our communities more safe and secure. When businesses speak, people listen and change happens. And our role at RBIJ, in case you don't know us, is to really figure out what that business role is going to be, what your business role is going to be. If it's a new business, we want to help you get started. If you've been in this space a really long time, we want to challenge you and ask you to figure out that what's next question. So we really want to underpin this conversation and everything you're going to hear with a reassurance that if you're inspired, and I know you will be, that you have the support you need in us and many others to take that first step or the 10th step or the 100th step, wherever you are. We're here, you have an army of people cheering you along and recognizing the value that you bring to the table. I'm going to close by saying that although we work across the US and Europe, I'm actually currently here in London right now, Michigan, you boss this. This is a state that I'm really excited to be working in, specifically Michigan businesses. You are a guide star for other businesses. You guys seem to be light years ahead of others in really understanding the value that you can play and the relevance to you and the impact that you can have, which is why I'm so pleased we're going to be hearing directly from some of you today and really to be part of this conversation where leaders can share firsthand why business engagement on criminal justice reform is so important. So without any more, I'm going to turn it over to our partner today, John Cooper, who's going to introduce our panel and will moderate the discussion this afternoon. Thank you guys so much.
And thank you, Celia. We appreciate you and your leadership on these issues. And we appreciate the kind words about Michigan too. So we have a really great panel for you all today. We are joined by Jahaun McKinley, who is the Senior Lean Manufacturing Manager at Cascade Engineering, Jeffrey Korzenik, the Chief Investment Strategist at Fifth Third Bank, John Meyer, Assistant Production Manager at Abcor Industries, and Tammy Britton, who's the Workforce Development Project Manager at Talent 2025. And I want to jump in right away with Jahaun. So Jahaun, what barriers to employment do people with criminal records face? And what consequences do these barriers have for people with records, their families, and their communities?
I think that one of the barriers, and we can go from a lack of opportunity to a minimized opportunity, because Michigan has done so well in the area of making that transition for people with criminal backgrounds relatively smooth. But I still think that there's a lot of work to do in that area. And so I won't say lack of opportunity, but I'll say a minimized opportunity. But there's a second leg to that. I think that we're only talking about the general labor force. And I think that as returning citizens grow in their years of being in the free world, then it becomes almost a stagnation, because now our companies willing to hire people with criminal backgrounds at higher levels in the organization. And so I think that we still have some work to do, because when you look across some of the jobs in the areas where we can be, even for myself, I see very little representation of people like me or a history like mine in that workforce.
Yeah, it's a real problem. Just one data point that I have is that almost 2/3 of people on parole are not employed currently. And that's just, for people who are vulnerable and struggling to get into the labor force to begin with, it's a real critically important problem. John, do you have anything to add sort of on the barriers that people face from criminal records?
Yeah, and you said what is the impact of it? And I think it is economic stagnation. When we start developing families and we can only grow to the pay range of $10 to $12 an hour on average, it becomes crippling. Even when you're trying to leave the work, that particular area, and you try to go into another area, you have to start all over again. So without the opportunity, it will eventually lead to economic stagnation.
And this is something that happens within families and also broader in communities.
Yes.
Communities that are highly impacted by the justice system see real issues with employment and lack of opportunity. And John Meyer, it's a housing issue in addition to an employment issue, right?
It is. Right now, even pre-COVID, it was really hard for somebody who's a returning citizen to find somewhere to live. If it wasn't for certain ministries and things like that, they'd be in big trouble. And so one of the things that we've done is we have kind of associate ministries that we work with. And so if we know somebody's getting out and they've contacted Abcor and they're looking for a job, we can forward their information on to the ministries and things like that. But housing and just giving somebody an opportunity to get a job, those are huge.
So I want to go to Jeff Korzenik next. Stepping back to a more macro level, what impact on the economy do we see from incarceration and the widespread exclusion of people with criminal records from the labor market?
Yeah, I'm going to second what Jahaun said. Economic stagnation is really not just an issue for the families and the communities impacted by the justice system, but the numbers are so extraordinarily large in the United States that it's an issue for all of us. Let me put some numbers on that. Economists agree that GDP growth, the growth of the whole economy, boils down to how fast can you grow your labor force, and that's a challenge for us because of demographics, a declining birth rate in the United States, and how fast can you grow the productivity of people who are in the labor force. So are you making full use of people? Pre-pandemic, our labor force was roughly 160 million people. We've got 19 million people in the United States who have a felony record. So that's an enormous exclusion. And we think that the cost to growth over time measures in at least the hundreds of billions and likely trillions of dollars. Not someone else's money, all of our money. So it's a big, big cost.
And if we helped more people with felonies get jobs, what sort of economic gains do you think we would see from correcting those distortions of the labor market?
We'd certainly enhance our growth rate and the length of time we can run before we run out of room to grow. One of the concerns we had pre-pandemic is that the US labor force at a 3.5% unemployment rate was simply running out of room to grow, and that the way we could extend our expansion and strengthen our expansion was to bring people with records more fully into the economy. By our estimate, it would have added several years of growth. At the time, that was roughly worth $400 billion a year. So you're really talking a significant impact. And that's just in pure GDP terms. There's a whole follow-on multiplier effect when you talk about the ability to improve communities, to break intergenerational poverty. So it's very hard to put exact dollars amount on it, but I feel very comfortably saying that you could be talking in the trillions of dollars of contribution to our economy if we can get this fixed.
That is staggering. And I appreciate you sharing those numbers. I'm going to go to Tammy next. Tammy, what economic benefits has your organization seen across Michigan from companies working to hire people with criminal records?
Sure. So here at Talent 2025, we're a regional organization. We focus on West Michigan. However, a lot of this would apply statewide. So two of the key performance indicators that we focus on are increasing the number of prime age adults. Those are the adults 25 to 54 in the labor force. And one of the things that we know is that prime age adults are formerly incarcerated individuals or those with a criminal history are disproportionately prime age adults. So the two are tied together. And then also we focus on increasing the number of households living at or above the Alice threshold. So understanding, individuals or families who are much like we've already heard here, experiencing something like economic stagnation. How can you reduce their barriers to not only access employment, but to access employment that sustains a livable wage for the individual in the household? And we have found through a lot of research that one of the biggest barriers here in West Michigan and across the state is having a criminal record. So there's undoubtedly economic benefit that comes when you reduce this as a barrier to the workforce.
Awesome, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit more about what individual companies are doing. And I'm going to go to John Meyer from Abcor first, and then I'll go to Jahaun. John, you started to tell us a little bit about some of the things Abcor does to support people with criminal records that you've brought in the company. Could you talk a little bit more about your overall sort of program for second chance hiring?
Sure. So Abcor has been doing second chance hiring for, I believe, about 9 years. I paroled in January of 2018, and I was hired at Abcor to work on the loading dock. And about 2.5 months later, I became the assistant production manager, and I'm now managing the plant and human resources and operations. What we do is we have been able to set up a culture that is friendly to, not just returning citizens, but veterans, maybe a single mom that's been out of the workforce for a while, things like that. And so we make this a low stress, low drama environment. We're not worried about anybody looking up anybody's criminal records or anything like that, because we don't have to tolerate it. And it's inviting. Like, this is not a burden to people. If our shift starts at 5 in the morning, at 4:30, there are people just standing around drinking coffee, hanging out. This is just part of their lives. And so now we do kind of some things here at Abcor where we try and, build our community and our family, ties. So about once a month, we'll shut the plant down and we'll make food for everybody, both on first or second shift. And with the owners, we'll all sit down and break bread together. And from somebody that has been in prison, they understand what that means to sit down and share a meal with somebody. And they also, some of the food that we serve, it's not just hot dogs, right? So, everything that you can't get in prison, like steaks and ice cream and things like that. So we are all about that culture. We allow our employees, if they have counseling or if they have an appointment to see their parole agent or whatever, like, it's okay. We're not saving lives, we're powder coating wood, and we allow them to go to those. And you know, in a pre-COVID Michigan, Ottawa County, there were 0.8 employees for every one job. And so there are certain companies that were not hiring, you know, people with records, and we were. And, you know, every single shift last year, first, second, and weekends was managed by somebody that was still on parole. And that says a lot for this company. It says a lot for the culture. And yeah, thank you.
Sure. Jahaun, could you talk a little bit about Cascade Engineering, the Second Chance Hiring Program there, and what you guys do to support people with criminal records in your workforce?
Just like John said, Cascade Engineering has actually been on a journey for quite some time. The difference, and it's kind of hard to explain because we don't see it as a program, it's just a part of the hiring process. And so Cascade is just looking at how can we match our talent with your skills, regardless to your background. And so again, we know it's a program, but it isn't practiced as a program because you're just seen as an applicant, and we're just interested in, can you fulfill the skill that we need in order to get this job done? As my story in itself is one of those, is, you know, it exemplifies that. I came in as a general labor, and just similar to John, now I'm the regional manager down here in Texas, which I hope to get back to Michigan soon. But it's one of those things where they just looked at my skill set and the skills that I had developed throughout the years, and they said, and I was able to move through positions based on that, and it was nothing else. And again, it's, if you want to share your story, you can share your story, but there's nobody out there going out there looking for people with criminal backgrounds to kind of bash them or bully them around their past.
From a performance standpoint, from a loyalty standpoint, from a turnover standpoint, how have people at Cascade with criminal records performed in your experience?
I think they've done, because most of the time I either know the men or the men know my story, men and women know my story. And so we kind of connect at different points. And I would say probably we all get hired in as general laborers. I do not know one person who came in with a criminal background that remains as a general laborer. So they went on to get technical positions. They went on to get supply chains positions. They went on to get logistic positions. And so that.
I'm going to go to John Meyer next. Hey, John, from a turnover, from a loyalty, from a performance standpoint, how have people at Abcor with records performed?
Better than any kind of estimate, that I would have ever made. It is, they're the first ones here to volunteer for overtime. You can always tell somebody that's, that's committed, and a lot of returning citizens, like, if they see something, they do something. We just had one the other day that saw the garbage can in the bathroom was full and they emptied it, right? They pick up litter. They don't just walk by it. Like, and they want to learn. Look, all I needed was a chance, right? And when we hire people, we tell them, like, your past doesn't define you, right? It is, your actions now and going into the future. Let's develop those skill sets. And yeah, so and we do hire. On July 2nd, we had a guy that paroled right out of MDOC, and he started here July 6th, right? We had to use his parole ID to complete his paperwork. So, and he has worked every day. He's here on time. He's here ready to work. He's volunteered for every overtime shift that we've had. Those are the kind of people that we look for. And all these other employers, those are the kind of people they dream about, right? So it's pretty cool.
So I want to go to Tammy next. We've heard really positive stories from Jahaun and John about second chance hiring. Are these stories unusual in your experience?
No, not at all. So Talent 2025 over the past 4 to 5 years has actually tracked how many employers in West Michigan are committed to second chance hiring. And about 4 years ago, it was at around 450 that we were able to track. And when we recalculated that just a few months ago, we're at over 700 employers that are committed to second chance hiring. And that's just in West Michigan, just through data that we're able to access. So no, these stories are not unusual. And then we also have our friends at the 32-2 initiative here in West Michigan, which for the good of the order is an initiative that started out as just getting 30 employers to commit to hiring 2 returning citizens and track their data for wages and retention for 2 years. And that has also shown positive trends in wages and retention, and it started at 30 employers, grew to over 500 who were willing to track their data here. So no, this is not unusual. This is a story that we hear all the time. And we actually find that employers who are committed to hiring to second chance hiring are also then much more willing to be supportive of their employees, and they're much more willing to engage in things with us at Talent 2025 that would help them become community leaders and advocates for second chance hiring.
That's awesome. And
It really is.
are you guys reaching out to businesses who are skeptical of second chance hiring, and sort of what are the barriers that or sort of misgivings that you hear from them?
We do reach out to other businesses who may or may not have already begun second chance hiring, or are for some reason not as public with the decision that they've made. And a lot of this will revolve around stigma, but then some of the other things that we find are not knowing where to find talent locally, and also not knowing how to best retain the talent once the decision has been made. So those are some of the barriers we find that employers come up against when they make the decision to commit to second chance hiring.
That makes sense. Jeff, anything to add on the barriers question?
Yeah, I want to, because I'm the economist and I represent what's known as the dismal science, I have to push back a little bit. One of the reasons that the people who are participating on this panel can report such great positive results is because they are doing it the right way. And as I travel around the country speaking to thousands of business owners every year, many people have had a negative experience with second chance hiring, not because there's a problem with second chance hiring, but because they don't follow the model. And Western Michigan is indeed fortunate, and it's had great pioneers, Fred Keller at Cascade, Mark Peters at Butterball Farms. So these are people who understand you need a pipeline to say who's ready for employment, and then critically you need that environment, and John talked about this very well. It's an environment that supports people's continued employment, and it works not just for people with criminal records, but people who have been marginalized in other ways. So when you are out there talking to business owners, I hear a lot, I've tried that, it didn't work. But this model, the model that is being positioned by Tammy's organization and others in Western Michigan, elsewhere in the country, does work. It's very consistent. It delivers highly engaged, highly loyal employees, and that's great. And just real quickly, I will actually answer the question you asked. Businesses generally fear liability and safety, quality, and reputational risks. And all of those you can overcome if you follow this kind of discipline model that is being presented in Michigan.
That makes sense. So one point I often hear made in favor of second chance hiring is that the vast majority of people who go to jail and prison will be released back in the community. Could you expand on that point and explain why it's important?
The numbers are roughly 95% of people who are incarcerated will someday not be incarcerated. So we have a choice in the business community. Where do we want those millions of people, right? Roughly 700,000 people are released from prisons every day. Do we want them to be productive members of society, or do we want them caught in this cycle of desperation that produces more crime? So we all benefit when we have safer communities and when we can tap the talent that's out there.
I'm so glad you brought up the public safety case? Because I think that's actually critically important for lawmakers and members of the business community to understand, because incarceration is a temporary absence from the community, and ultimately we should be asking from a policy standpoint, what are the things that help bring people back into the community and help make them successful? And you've identified sort of talent identification and then supports within a business as sort of the key components of a second chance hiring program. Are there other things that you would recommend businesses sort of focus on if they're interested in second chance hiring?
I do think that there's opportunities to take baby steps, right? It sounds very intimidating to take this on. And so one of the things we talk about is an initiative we call Bridging the Box, where it involves, for instance, educating yourself on what it means to have a felony conviction. It's often a crime not of malice, but of stupidity. Young men in particular, and young women too, but it's predominantly a male disease. Young men take excess risks and sometimes display bad judgment. It may be crimes related to addiction that's past, but educating yourself about what a criminal record really means. Visiting companies like the ones represented on this panel to see how it works. I've studied a company in Ohio. The key transformational moment for their management team, their executive team, was visiting a company that had long established successful second chance hiring. Look for low risk hires. If someone's been out for 10 years and been a productive member of society, they're just another employee. They don't need any particular support network. Think about amnesty. I know employees who live in fear every day that a very old, often 20 or 25-year-old conviction might come to light and force them to be terminated under company rules. Understand the partners you have in the nonprofit community. All of these things are steps you can take that don't require you to be outside the prison gates with an employment application, but can lead you along that path so you can make an informed decision whether it's right for your business.
So I want to go to Jahaun next. So Jeff talked about pipeline and supports. Could you talk a little bit about what Cascade does in terms of talent identification and recruitment of people with records? Yeah.
What was that last part?
Do you guys do anything sort of special to seek out people with records and recruit? Or is it sort of people come in the door and you put them through the program?
Yeah, I mean, it's really that we just post a job, and whoever can fulfill the job in terms of whoever meet the qualifications of a job in terms of your skill set, then you're called for an interview. And then basically, if there's any type of of any type of holdback, it would be because how you performed at your interview. It wouldn't be because of how you perform because of your criminal background. So if you were a poor interviewer, whether you had a criminal background or you were a PhD, you probably wouldn't get the job, at Cascade. And so that's just how, and there was a time where it was, we met some folks that were qualified, they did well, and they had a criminal background. We met some folks that were not qualified and didn't do well in the interview, and they didn't get a job. And that's just how we approach it. And once you're given an employment opportunity, and again, I definitely understand what you're saying. It's not that you go into this segment of a program with Cascade. You show up to work just like everybody else. And if you're late, you're going to get points just like a person who had no criminal background. Your performance is predicated just like a person that has zero experience or knowledge around criminal activity and backgrounds and experience, just like you are. You become an employee, period.
Makes sense to me. John, you mentioned that you had a recent hire who was paroled on the 2nd of July and started work on the 6th. How did you identify him as a candidate? And, is that part of a broader recruitment program at Abcor?
It is one of those things where, the family knew about Abcor. We've been in touch through the Michigan Department of Corrections JPay system, which is their email. And he didn't have a job. His interview happened the day he got out on parole. But it just happened to be that we were hiring. And, even through the COVID thing where people are paroling and they can't go to a job interview, they can't go to the Secretary of State and get their ID or Department of Health and Human Services and get their bridge card or anything. And I actually interviewed 3 guys behind the tailgate of my truck in a parking lot, just because I knew that they had just gotten out of prison. They had nothing to do. Their parole agent from Holland was my old parole agent and is a super awesome guy. And he said, hey, give these guys a shot. And we do. And they're right behind me right now working. So, and as for, one of the previous questions regarding, like treating somebody different with a record, no, the culture here is accepting of everybody. And that is why people that have never had a speeding ticket want to work here, because this is a low stress, low drama environment. We have a golden retriever that's walking around the shop floor, it's okay. And we make this a place that people want to work. And whether somebody has a criminal record or it's, a grandparent that's supplementing their income or whatever, like everybody here can work together and we all learn from each other. It's not like everybody's walking around talking about prison. No, it's, let's talk about quality. Let's talk about all the things that we can do. And even during an interview, like we don't have applications here. Our JT Weiss, our CEO, made it, if you want to work here, come on in, drop off a resume. Look, I can tell if there's a gap in a resume, right? For 2 to 5 years, something like that. So, but I don't make a thing of it. We sit there and we talk and I say, all right, this is, we're people, planet, profit. This is what we're doing. And then I walk them through the shop and I say, this is our sanding department. This is quality. This is the paint line. And just say, does anything interest you? Right. Because I don't want somebody with asthma to be in sanding. That's, and that's how we find, our talent is, you might hire somebody in at $13.50 an hour. And then all of a sudden, at review time, they're already at $16. But we've also hired out of the Vocational Village, which is in Ionia. They're training people in CNC. But we have 4 CNC machines running 24 hours a day. We need operators. And so if you're, paroling with that skill, now all of a sudden you're walking into a $16 an hour, walk-on position because how to run a CNC machine. So there's a lot of that. But again, we make this the place that people want to work. We know that there are several other, even our one of our vendors in Chicago sent their operations manager up here just to see what we're doing because they were having such a hard time hiring people. We said, look, it's okay. You can trust people. Like it's okay to trust somebody just because they, made a bad choice or whatever it is. Like, don't give them an opportunity to fail. Just trust them. And that's what we do here.
That makes sense to me. I want to go to Tammy next. Tammy, John mentioned the Vocational Village at the Ionia facility. Could you talk a little bit about sort of what sort of job training is happening inside the prison system in Michigan and how employers are connecting with skilled tradespeople that are incarcerated?
Sure, I can do my best. So at the Vocational Village, I don't know, I don't have it committed to heart every program that is happening, but there's skilled trades training happening there. And what employers are able to do, and I actually would encourage anyone to do this, is to tour the Vocational Village, see if what's being taught there matches what it is that they need within their own operations. And if so, they can start to develop those connections and the partnerships so that when individuals are released from Vocational Village and say they're coming back to a place that's convenient for the employer, that's an opportunity to begin enhancing your talent pipeline, to be hiring individuals as they are released from Vocational Village. But then also, I think it really builds into some of the other conversations that we're having is that those employers up front are understanding what some of the barriers are going to be when they're hiring someone So maybe that's transportation, maybe that's lack of ID, maybe that's housing. And so they're able to do things like build culture or support within their organization, so that as they're enhancing their talent pipeline from Vocational Village and seeing the benefits that can come from the skilled trades training, they're also able to better support someone that they might hire from the Vocational Village.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to Jeff next, and I want to talk a little bit about policy. You know, at Safe and Just Michigan, a couple of our major policy initiatives have involved barriers to employment. You know, we've been working on expungement, which is criminal record sealing, for those that are not familiar with the idea, and also on reforms to occupational licensing. But when you talked about sort of second chance hiring, I didn't hear you talk about some of the other areas where we see policy activity, including, you know, ban the box, tax subsidies for short-term hiring, and also certificates of employment. I mean, do you care to weigh in on sort of your views on those issues?
Well, I approach it from a framework of sort of countering the pushback that is prevalent among the public, that the more you ease restrictions, the worse for public safety. That's not really true. You need to view the trade-off between public safety and restrictions as not a straight line, but one that should be viewed with the lens of employment. If you ease restrictions that are barriers to employment, then you actually increase public safety. And so what are those policies? Well, you know, Safe and Just Michigan is probably focused on the two most important ones. Expungement. When you expunge records, not only do you remove the just the screening out process that happens, but it also protects employers from liability, right? You can't be liable, have extra liability for a criminal record you couldn't possibly know about. So that's an important consideration. The licensing barriers are extremely important. I mean, why state by state, but in many states, you know, you can't be a barber. And, you know, I get it if it was a Sweeney Todd crime of, you know, if you murdered someone with scissors, but the vast majority of these issues shouldn't be barriers. Specific to the ones you mentioned, I do think certificates of employability are important. Because if there is someone who does not qualify for expungement or other kind of record sealing, these typically offer liability protection for employers. They're often too cumbersome to get or costly to get, but that's an important middle road between expungement and doing nothing. Ban the box has had very mixed success. Unfortunately, it's become almost this litmus test. If you're for criminal justice reform, you're for ban the box. It shouldn't be. It should be weighed on the merits. Ban the box can be successful if it forces employers to really think about, well, I'm going to interview people anyway, and I'm going to invest time. I might as well learn how to do it right. Unfortunately, often the response has been, particularly employers who've had a bad experience with second chance hiring, tend to practice avoidance strategies. And to name but one of them that we've studied at Fifth Third, we've never published this, was a thumbnail sketch. One way that employers, and this is to John's point about missing gaps in resumes, we found employers in ban the box states tend to avoid resumes that have long durations of unemployment in them. And so you actually have worse outcomes for people, whether you have criminal records or not, but who have markers that have led employers to avoid that because of ban the box. So it's not proven to be a very successful strategy. People have mixed views about it. I don't like to get into that debate, but it's by far not the most productive route to go down.
Fair enough. And just to be clear on the ban the box, I mean, our experience is that, you know, there are many employers that do it voluntarily as part of a broader second chance hiring, but that you run into problems when employers are uninterested in doing it and are forced to by law, and therefore use filtering techniques. So Jennifer Doliak's research, for example, says that African-American men are disparately impacted by ban the box policies. You know, and other places have had better experiences with it, but that tends to be correlated with more openness to second chance hiring in the first place.
Right. I always say for second chance employers, the box is an irrelevancy, but until you're to that point, it can actually get in the way of progress.
I want to open up the panel for thoughts on policy discussion, from employment to licensing to ban the box. Comments?
I would.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, all right. No, it's when we put a job on Indeed or anything like that, we're not. We don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable when they come in for an interview. Like there's nothing formal or anything like that. And we have people that will walk up and just ask for applications and things like that. And I know that there's been a strong push on both ban the box, but also when it comes to clean slate or for wiping off certain criminal histories and things like that, that only makes sense. If you got a trespassing ticket at a state park when you were 17 with your buddies, right? There are some places that can't hire you. And, and then there's some places you can't live because you had a misdemeanor ticket, or, you won't qualify for other things. So, there's some really, really good legislation that's coming through right now. And I'm proud of you guys that are doing that. So thank you.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And I just want to plug expungement for the group. There's really terrific research that came out of the University of Michigan fairly recently. It was published in the Harvard Law Review last month. But it finds, they did a study of people who got expungements in Michigan. And they looked at their recidivism, their income, and their employment. And the outcomes they found is, first, people who get expungements in Michigan are less likely than a member of the general public to commit a crime. They see a 23% increase in income within the first year and an 11% increase in employment generally. It's just, the impact of it is staggering.
And John,
yeah.
I'm also going to say, I use that study in my economic presentations as a measure of how much we have to gain.
Yeah.
Right? If it's that a 25% growth in income, if you could do that across, 19 million people with convictions, that is economy changing. And now you can't do that, but it's a great example. I wish it were published in the Harvard Business Review, not the Harvard Law Journal.
I could not agree more. That's awesome. But yeah, I mean, we've seen impact estimates for that legislation, and the key part of that legislation is the automatic expungement, which says we'll seal criminal records after a designated amount of time, 7 years for misdemeanors, 10 years for felonies. But the impact estimate for that, just from the mayor's office in Detroit, is that 122,000 people in Wayne County will see their records sealed immediately. And if you look at, a 23% increase in income for all of those people, that's a huge number for Detroit, which is, it's one of the poorest cities in the country. I mean, it can really have a staggering impact. So I got to get us back on track here, but I wanted to plug that legislation. It's on the Senate floor. We're hoping it will move in September.
Hey,
so
John,
I want to go to, yeah, what's that?
I just mentioned one thing.
Yeah,
The Clean Slate package has broad business community support in West Michigan, no doubt about that. But then something else that I think, it's not legislative policy, but something else that I think is really exciting is the partnership between the Secretary of State's office and MDOC to improve the way that they are issuing state ID upon exit from an MDOC facility. Because that program, as well-intentioned as it was not delivering the impact that it needed to. And now by overhauling it, you're really reducing one really critical barrier to employment by making sure that everyone's leaving with a state-issued ID. So we're excited about that one too.
Absolutely. And I want to go to Jahaun.
I just wanted to add to that expungement. I think that Michigan is doing a good job, and I'm glad to see that it's a 25% in income growth, but I think that Michigan needs to expand it. Right now, expungement is only targeted towards certain crimes, and I think that we need to expand that, as well as pardons, because we have to pardons also has to be a tool out of our box as well to help that situation. Yeah,
and the situation with pardons, we see almost none of them. Just in the last decade, there's been a couple dozen. And with expungement, Jahaun makes a really good point. And the automatic expungement has all assaultive crimes carved out of eligibility. That isn't what we advocated for, but the data on violent crime recidivism is quite striking, actually. It's very low. Recidivism rates for people who commit acts of violence is actually lower than those who commit property crimes. And it's just, unfortunately, we can't get the policy to reflect that because of misconceptions within the legislature and the general public. So I want to go back to Tammy, because Talent 25 has been super supportive of criminal justice reform at the state level, and that's really important from our perspective. So Tammy, could you talk a little bit about why state level criminal justice reform is important to your organization and why the business community should care about reforming the criminal justice system?
Sure. So Talent 2025, really a big part of what we want to do is we want to work to increase the number of employers who are committed to hiring returning citizens. But we also know that in order to do that work, the problem is twofold. There's issues with public policy and there's issues with misconceptions around second chance hiring. So some of our work can get at increasing the number of employers who are hiring returning citizens, but then there's another piece of our work that really focuses on supporting policy like the Clean Slate legislation, and where we come in and where we find that we can have the most impact by being a business advocate for changes or criminal justice reform is by supporting legislation that very specifically reduces any barrier to the workforce. So Clean Slate legislation reduces barriers to the workforce. The work being done by the Jails and Pretrial Incarceration Task Force also reduces barriers to the workforce. I already mentioned it's more like an administrative policy, but the work being done to partner with the Secretary of State's office and the MDOC, one additional barrier to the workforce reduced. And the reason why that's so important is because as a data-driven organization, we know that the easier it is to get into the workforce, the easier it is to have economic self-sufficiency. And so reducing the barriers is where we have to start. And the business community also benefits from that. And, there's a lot of recognition, or especially pre-COVID when the labor market was so tight, there's a lot of recognition around the fact that we need to make our company as low barrier for entry as possible. We need to offer competitive wages. We need to offer the right employee supports. And then some of the organizations that are involved with Talent 2025 really take that to the next level, and they bridge that into something like criminal justice reform policy advocacy. And we here provide them a platform for that.
That's awesome. And since you mentioned COVID, I want to go to Jeff because I think this is an important point. So Jeff, as Tammy mentioned, before COVID, we had tight labor markets, and we had a very strong case for criminal justice reform from sort of a talent identification, from a productivity standpoint. Is that still true in the post-COVID world? And what is the best economic case for criminal justice reform right now?
The case is criminal justice reform is good for business. Whether you have slack labor markets or tight labor markets, second chance hiring is a pathway to engaged and loyal employees. I have been surveying some of the companies that I've studied in depth and asked how their hiring practices are changed. I'll share with you Jeff Brown, who runs Brown Superstores, a chain of grocery stores that serve, in particular, urban food deserts in Philadelphia, has 600 employees with records out of his 2,500 employees. And I asked if he's changing his practices, and he said he hears of competitors who have trouble getting people to come back to the workforce. He has no such problem. And he uses a term often associated with second chance hires. They have grit. They are used to navigating risk of all sorts in their lives. COVID is just another day at the office, and their engagement and dedication is really shining through. And I think that's important for all businesses to recognize. This is just a great talent pipeline.
So we called this webinar the business case for criminal justice reform. I just want to recap it for the audience. So first, criminal justice reform is good for business. It is good for talent identification. It's good for hiring. Second, it's good for society, and it's good for society in two ways. First, it improves public safety, and second, it improves economic productivity. It improves our tax base. So, I mean, from my perspective, this is just something that everybody in the business community should support. I wonder, sort of, you know, in your travels and in your work, sort of, have you seen businesses embrace this message enthusiastically? Have you seen reticence, and sort of what are your observations about the business community's interest in this issue?
I will say that the tight labor markets were much more helpful in getting people to consider it. And, you know, businesses were willing to play offense in terms of talent seeking. Right now, businesses are so busy playing defense, managing through this very tough economic environment, that I think it's challenging for all of us who care about these initiatives. But we will get there. The demographics are our destiny. We have had declining birth rates in the United States. We are already looking from talent pools that are 20% smaller than the millennial peak. The talent pools of the future will be 40% below the millennial peak in terms of declining birth rates, and we can't afford to avoid this. My hope is that the focus on social justice and criminal justice will get businesses to look beyond the statements, right? We've now identified all the companies out there who are against racism, as I guess opposed to those who are for it. You know, everyone's come out with an anti-racism statement. If you want to do something, the ugly statistic is that criminal justice has disproportionately affected communities of color, particularly African-American communities. 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction. We will never get to any kind of equality of opportunity, let alone outcome across racial lines, until we embrace second chance hiring.
That's very well put. And we've got a ton of questions, so I'm going to transition over to our questions here. I just want to close with a observation, and I want to give props to our co-sponsor, the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice, because their mission is to organize businesses to advocate for second chance hiring and advocate for criminal justice reform. And my observation, certainly from working with legislature, is that the business community has a huge, huge influence with legislature. Their voice is listened to on many issues, and criminal justice reform should be one of them. And, you know, we've made some progress in Michigan in recent years, and that has been due in large part to strong support from the business community. And not just for sort of employment-oriented reforms, but even reforms like parole. And that's been critically important to progress, and I think it will continue to be. So with that, I'm going to take us to questions. We've got a bunch of questions, and okay, so here's a really good question to start out with, and I'll go to Jeff for this one. So one common argument you see to expanding the labor market to people with criminal convictions is that they'll compete with people who are already in it that don't. Can you speak to that concern, Jeff?
Yeah, this is a free market. People should be able to compete, and the jobs should go to the best candidates regardless of the background. You know, at some point, if it's not ours to judge, you know, people have been through a system that has judged them and had them do their time. Once that time is passed, we don't have to forgive. That's not our job either. But we have to accept that these people are now back in society, and they should be able to compete on a fair level.
John and Jahaun, anything to add to that?
I would like to add to that. I do agree with Jeff in that, but I still think that it has to run simultaneously with, we have to create a system where companies feel comfortable hiring, because if everybody just took the exclusion route, then we wouldn't have any jobs. Because now if you're saying, well, we're free to compete with everybody, but I don't want that type of program, then we'll be outside looking in. And so I think it has to be a combination of, yes, we're free to work, you're free to hire anybody regardless of their criminal background. But you know what, guys? We also have to support this. We also have to support every segment of the community.
Absolutely. John, anything to add on the competition point?
You know, we sometimes compete for some of the same talent, depending on what it's for. But kind of to echo what we're talking about, it is, you know, if you make a culture that people feel comfortable, you know, and that just kind of radiates out of here, and people talk about it, and we don't discriminate on crimes, right? If you got a trespassing ticket, or, you know, we've got a guy out on our floor that did 50 years in prison, and he's working circles around some of the young guys. I mean, this is, you know, like we don't look at that. And, you know, even in people that have, you know, power, influence, authority, or control in our management department, regardless of what, you know, if they have a criminal record, I share an office with two guys that have never been to jail. You know what I mean? The guy next to me is an Eagle Scout, right? But we all get along, and everybody respects, you know, our history, right? And there are some things that I've experienced that they haven't, and some things that they have that I haven't, and we take that knowledge and we put that together. We've got a 74-year-old guy who's out on our floor, who is awesome, and he was an engineer before he went to prison, right? And he applied for a $13 an hour job. And regardless of what his crime was, as soon as we found out he was an engineer, he's a pilot, he's got all these good things going on, you know, that's pretty sweet.
Very cool. I want to go to Tammy next. So we got a question, and there's several sort of along these lines, but what can we do to challenge the stereotypes which are a major barrier to employment for returning citizens?
So I think, well, here at Talent 2025, a big part of what we do, of course, is use the data to tell the story, but then also to use personal narratives to tell the story. So I think those are both key parts. Peer-to-peer mentorship, joining different groups, whether here in West Michigan, again, we have things like The Source, which is an employer resource network, or we have statewide supported through Michigan Works agencies, we have our business resource networks. So I think there are a lot of ways for employers to get plugged in so that they have supports, that they can see other businesses of different industries, different sizes, that are doing work committed to second chance hiring and able to see some success. So I think that's one important piece. But then I think from our perspective, again, at Talent 2025, you know, we really value the CEO commitment, but something that we've really started to build on is understanding that the HR department, whoever that may fall to, the HR manager, someone that's in operations, it can vary from organization to organization, but that those individuals also have to be really informed about what second chance hiring means, and really committing themselves to not only beginning the process, but completing the process through things like retention and wage increases. So I think that's one way that employers, well, that's a lot of ways that employers can begin to engage, reduce the stigma, find community within the business community. And then really in West Michigan, it's unique because the business leaders who are committed to those things are also community leaders. And we're really lucky to have those people here, you know, whether it's Fred Keller from Cascade or Mark Peters from Butterball. We have those leaders that can help reduce the stigma, and do help reduce the stigma here, to the point where we're starting to see new business leaders. Here at Talent 2025, we work with companies of all different sizes and industries who are emerging as leaders to reduce the stigma.
Yeah, I mean, JT Weiss at Abcor is a great example, right? We love JT. He's come to Lansing to support some of our legislation in the past, and he's a terrific leader on these issues. I'm glad you brought up HR departments, because, like, you know, leadership, you know, in the C-suite does matter, but if the gatekeepers for hiring are filtering people out on the front end, you know, it can really undercut second chance hiring efforts.
And I know it's been mentioned a little bit, but a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, if your HR department is already committed there and you're doing active steps to reduce bias in your hiring, you could also be doing active steps to reduce bias for second chance hiring.
Yeah, and I would actually love to do a webinar for HR professionals. You know, my background's as a defense lawyer, and you know, my experience is that HR folks and legal folks tend to be the most risk averse, and you know, tend to be the ones pushing for blanket exclusions for people because you know, if there's one bad thing that happens, it sort of blows back on them.
John, could I just mention the role of SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management? They have been championing this. They have the Getting Talent Back to Work toolkit. And so I think for HR people, that's a great place to start. GettingTalentBackToWork.org is a terrific toolkit, includes videos and all sorts of content that's helpful.
Thanks so much for mentioning that. It's a great resource. I encourage everybody to check it out. Let's see. We have a question, where can I get an overview of the model that's being used in West Michigan? And I guess that's a Tammy question, I think.
There's probably a few good resources. You could go to Talent 2025's website, talent2025.org. But another great one is 322. They just started their own website. So spelled out 322, I want to say .org. They have a lot of great resources. SHRM was already mentioned. SHRM has some great resources. And also one of the really key employer supports here in Michigan that I mentioned are the Source, which is an employer resource network, but then also business resource networks, which are programs, I guess, for lack of a better word, programs of Michigan Works agencies. And each region in Michigan has a Michigan Works agency. So those are some starting points to go see what the model is that's being used here. I would also say check out some of the organizations that are doing reentry work. So whether it's Hope Network or Goodwill, there's a really unique one called Fresh Coast Alliance here in West Michigan that does some really cool work. I would check out those organizations too, just to see what supports are being offered, what it looks like, and how the connections are made to employers.
John or Jahaun, anything to add on that point?
No.
I think just, one of our resources is just knowing your local probation and parole agents, right? If somebody has a job, they're not out there doing bad things because they have to be responsible. They're not staying up late or whatever. And so that is, that's been a great thing. James Wilson is our Ottawa County parole agent for this area. And he's very familiar with Abcor. He's familiar with the different ministries like Man Up and Building Men for Life and all those. That is one of those kind of resources that we like to hit.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Michigan is truly a blessed state in that you can go into any shop and ask about any resource and you're going to get directed to the right agency. So we really are a blessed state.
Okay. I've got a couple questions about the vocational village that I'll just take quickly. So the first is, how is the vocational village funded? And that's funded by the Department of Corrections. They have money they've spent in their budget to build out skilled trades training facilities in 3 prisons. The most recent one is the women's prison. And there's also one in Jackson in addition to the Ionia one. They serve about 500 people at a time, which is a small fraction of the 36,000 people we have in prison right now. But it's been a productive program. I mentioned the employment rates for people on parole is about 2/3 of people are unemployed of those on parole. For vocational village graduates, it's less than half of that. The early research shows, and that's good. It's still not a great number, quite candidly, and I think there are things we need to do as a state to improve our pipeline for people coming out of prison. And in relation to that, so John, you mentioned, you guys have to, it's sort of an ad hoc process. You have people reach out to you, you reach out to the parole officers. Do you have thoughts on how communities like West Michigan can build up the pipeline for people coming out of the system?
Absolutely. So, for us, my experience, I was on warden's forums and I controlled the prisoner benefit fund at facilities and things like that. I've communicated with former wardens, right? That's, you know, and, you know, that's one resource. We reached out to a warden in St. Louis who is in the construction industry, or, you know, they're building, I don't know if they're building picnic tables for state parks, they're doing something. And so these people know how to use pneumatic tools. They know how to, you know, they know about safety, personal protective equipment, all that kind of stuff. So it's just knowing what you're looking for, you know, and that somebody's committed, right? In an interview, you know, having spent 6 years in prison, I can tell if somebody's, you know, a facade, if they're faking it, or if it's somebody who really wants to make it. And we'll give them all the tools that they can. But yeah, and in West Michigan, we have like 70x7 life recovery. And, you know, I mean, I get chills when I think about how many people have been impacted by that, because the day I got out, I went to 70x7 because I didn't have a job. I've shared, you know, before, you know, I didn't have anywhere to live when I got out of prison. So to have, you know, 70x7 and Man Up and Building Men for Life and all these different ministries, it's a huge deal. And any way that we can support them, we try to. So, and then, you know, if there's ever anybody, you know, or any companies that want to come take a tour and see how we do what we do, we welcome you. So I know JT Weiss, our CEO, just put something in the notes for that. So please come out and see it. You know, we're ambassadors for second chances. That doesn't mean that we have to tolerate Mickey Mouse stuff, because we don't. But for sure, you know, we have some real dedicated people. You know, they have ambition, they have integrity, and, you know, they're showing a commitment, and that's awesome.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the tours. You know, we've actually had legislators that have gone on tours of your facility, and it's really opened their eyes to things. And that matters, because the vast majority of our legislators don't know anyone who's been to prison, or at least don't know that they know anyone who's been to prison. And it's a real problem, because there's the issue of humanizing people, and also of helping lawmakers understand what the challenges really are. So I think, you know, visits to facilities like Abcor, Cascade is critically important.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Yeah. So got another vocational village question. Just how are people selected for that? I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that there's an application process. I think it's very selective, just given the limited number of slots. And I do believe MDOC makes calculated guesses on who's likely to be successful in that program.
John, it does require a GED.
Okay.
And also a sort of good behavior time frame beforehand. So those are, you know, two of the minimum requirements.
We've got a question about different industries. So, and I'll just lead off. Our experience has been that certain kinds of industries are more and less interested in second chance hiring. So on the sort of receptive side, we see manufacturing, we see building trades, restaurants. And then on the other side, you know, healthcare is for us at least not been very open to second chance hiring. Retail. I guess Tammy, I want to get your reaction to those observations, and then I'll go to Jeff.
Not an HR professional, but part of my general understanding that I've learned through talking with different companies are that per the EEOC guidelines, you know, you can't say that you do not hire someone with a criminal record. So there is the blanket statement to say that you do hire people who have criminal records, but where you see it happening the most are in industries, for lack of a better term, that are less regulated. That's not the best term because it doesn't hit really what I'm trying to get at. But when you look at hospitality industries that are more likely to do second chance hiring, manufacturing, some skilled trades, whatever it might be, you also see something coming into play, which is wages. So unfortunately, among different wages, if you look at the hospitality industry, you're going to see lower wages compared to something like the healthcare industry. You can still see steady wages, especially here in West Michigan when it comes to manufacturing. But Yes, we have anecdotally seen that same thing through some of the organizations that are more overtly committed to hiring returning citizens, and where you might have maybe fewer applicants for an entry-level position, whatever it might be. So industry definitely plays a factor. I don't have anything really firm to stick it to right now, but yes. However, I don't want to leave it there, because I will say that we have employers identified here at Talent 2025 from all industries that are committed to second chance hiring. But you do see some industries more active and overt in their second chance hiring efforts.
Yeah, and that makes sense. My observation, I'm going to go to Jeff after this to get his take, but my take is that it's probably two things. First is that, consumer facing industries tend to be much more concerned with reputational things, and the stigma tends to be more problematic for them. And also there's licensure issues, particularly with healthcare, that we see, and we're actually trying to get some of those laws changed. But Jeff, do you have thoughts on this observation?
Yeah, no, you nailed it, John. It's not facing the customer. It's not handling money. So the reputation issues and some of the perceived risks go away. So construction, manufacturing, and then simply in the restaurant industry, it does tend to be more back of the house, not people who are client facing, and that's just been cultural. We just have to change the culture.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about financial services too, because I have seen, I actually don't know what Fifth Third does, and I'd love to know. I know JP Morgan has been working on some second chance hiring efforts. Can you speak to the financial services industry approach to these issues?
Sure, we are heavily regulated. And however, we, through a trade association like JP Morgan, supported changes to some of those regulations that allowed for greater de minimis exemptions. So it is slowly but surely changing. At Fifth Third, we have probably taken more of a lead in terms of educating our customer base on the opportunities. Though we have done some hiring, a young man who I helped sponsor just got hired. I think he's going to be a fantastic colleague, and he really earned this. And I'm thrilled to have him as a colleague. He starts next month. So there is. It is rarer because of our regulatory barriers to this, but it is possible. JP Morgan has been, to their credit, I hate to compliment a competitor, but to their credit, they've taken a lead and have hired several thousands of people and have been much more deliberate about it and deserve credit for that.
I agree. Yeah, it's great. So we have a few, so here's one that I just want to speak to briefly. It's sort of asking the question of what role can employers play as we move away from punitive responses to harm and reduce our reliance on incarceration. And, there's a number of ways, right? One is supporting legislation like what we're working on, but also leading by example. And that, both internally by the way you run your business, but talking to your colleagues in the business community. The business community is more likely to listen to their peers than they are to listen to me. And that's part of why we want to put on a webinar like this one. And that's why, we recruit businesses to advocate for change. It's a critically important piece of the overall picture because the business community really is influential. And this is something I also want to mention, just from a political standpoint, the business community, it's everywhere. The business community can influence rural representatives. They can influence suburban representatives in addition to, urban. And that's critically important because what you tend to see is that suburban and rural representatives are mostly just hearing from their local law enforcement on policy issues. And, that tends to be a particular perspective on these issues. And it needs to be balanced with, what the business community sees as good for public policy.
Hey, John, can I add one thought to that too? If you look at legislators in Michigan, I think the highest percentage of legislators were former business people. So it is peer-to-peer communication when it's advocacy coming from the business community.
And, when we're talking about criminal justice policy, it really is the state legislature that makes almost all of it. And, they need to change the rules in order to change what's happening on the ground. And that runs the gamut from our sentencing and parole policies to, record keeping. There's rules around, what's public and what's not, and there's rules around licensing. Those are all state rules, and we need to change them if we're going to change what's happening in our communities. So we've got a few additional questions. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. Let's see. So there's a few questions from folks in other states from Michigan asking sort of how they can get similar initiatives started in their states. Tammy, do you have any thoughts on that? And if not, I'll go to Jeff.
I can try. Initiatives similar to which one? Or
I think the second chance hiring that we see, you guys advocating for, and Cascade and Abcor representing.
Something we talk about here at Talent 2025 a lot is finding a champion. So whether that's finding a business champion or that's finding a legislative champion, finding a champion for what it is that you want to advocate for. I think that's one really good place to start. And I know I've mentioned West Michigan a lot today, but we have champions here. We have plenty of champions here for second chance hiring. And I think that maybe that didn't used to be the case, but it's the case that I'm living in and working in now. And it's really refreshing. But then also to find a champion and something else that we make sure that we do is to not lead where we don't have to lead. So find others who are doing the work and find ways to support them. That's been a good one. And then another thing that I've mentioned a lot too are finding the different supports and building, understanding the talent pipeline is, or the second chance hiring is something that's not only a talent pipeline, talent development, retention, wages, it's all of it. So if you're only focusing on one small piece, you're already a step behind. So make sure that you're looking at it from a macro level and you're viewing every level or every area that you need to be successful. That's at least how I would view the success here in Michigan.
Makes sense to me. Anything to add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll reiterate, you need businesses listen to other businesses. And if you don't have someone in your state, because not every state really has a champion who's doing it the right way, it's hard to say these days, but get on an airplane. I have had second chance champions travel to speaking panels that Fifth Third has sponsored. They've come from other states. They've had businesses fly from other states to see them. Western Michigan is truly exceptional. Western Michigan and Cincinnati are the centers of this in the country. And, I'm trying not to plug this shamelessly, but one of the reasons I wrote my book, which is coming out in April, is to share the stories of business owners so that it can extend the reach of this. It's all about what businesses are doing. It's not what policymakers advise. It's what's actually out there working. And take nothing away from policymakers, of course, but it's really got to be a business-to-business story, whether it's delivered in person, over Zoom, or in a book. Yeah,
I think culture, word of mouth within the business community is incredibly important. And I think the what we talked about around Bounding Box is really illustrative of that. If the government tries to impose something that the community doesn't want, they're going to take evasive action, and it's going to create more problems. So we have a few more questions, but we're running out of time. So I want to give each panelist the opportunity to have a closing statement or talk about something that we haven't covered yet. And I want to start with Jahaun. What would you like to leave the audience with today?
I think I would like to lead the audience with this for those that are working in areas that do not have programs like this. I think the biggest thing is that this whole initiative is a menu of items. And you don't have to consume the entire menu of items. So just take a small piece of it, an appetizer, as we say, and just start there. Start with your appetizer. And I think it starts with cultural commitment. You can build a culture within your company without having somebody there. And so then when it is time to integrate somebody within the workforce, they'll be prepared. And I think that if you start now, if you start at that point, when you are able to attach to different companies who are doing it in other areas, or attach to different programs or whatever, then you'll be well prepared.
Thanks a lot. I want to go to John Meyer next. John, what would you like to leave the audience with today?
You know, as an employer, you know, having the politicians and, you know, the representatives come through, that's awesome, and trying to influence them, but give people a chance, right? You know, I applied for a $13 an hour job a couple days after I got out of prison here, and 2.5 months later, I was salaried. You know, a little more than a year after that, I bought my house, and I'm not a standalone one-off. I mean, there's, you know, I vote, right? You know, I volunteer. I try and do, you know, do the right thing. And all I needed was that chance to come in. And it's not that I had a chip on my shoulder or anything else, but you know, I had talent that, you know, apparently this company was looking for, and just do that low stress, low drama environment, you know, and make it a place that everybody wants to work. Whether, you know, I mean, whether it's JT going to Lansing to talk, or our CFO driving a guy to court, like, it's okay. We're all kind of in this together, and yeah, just give somebody an opportunity to prove themselves. I take chances on people. They're calculated risks based off of my experience. And then, you know, if you ever want to come for a tour, I know JT offered it up, please do, and just, you know, come see how we operate. So thank you. God bless.
Hey, thank you, John. I'll go to Tammy next. Tammy, what would you like to leave folks with today?
Sure. So understanding that this webinar is from the perspective of business, you know, I would just really reiterate, especially here in West Michigan, but business leaders are community leaders. So to support the cause, it's also important to realize that the business case for criminal justice reform is not mutually exclusive from the social case for criminal justice reform. So partnering with business leaders who are community leaders doing the work is a great way to enhance advocacy, a lot like you guys are doing at Safe and Just Michigan. And then finding the champions, I think, is something that really is successful here in West Michigan. I've mentioned a few, whether it's Cascade Engineering or Butterball Farms, but you know, we also have a lot of other organizations that are committed to this. Here at Talent 2025, specifically, some of our co-chairs for our Returning Citizens Committee are Jason Kerr at Valley City Electronic Recycling. He's a huge advocate. It's a huge part of his business model. We have Abcor here on the webinar with us today, but we also have Mike Dykstra at Zeeland Lumber, who's a huge advocate, huge part of his business model. So just remembering the business leaders are community leaders, and the business case is not mutually exclusive from the social case for criminal justice reform.
Well put. And we'll go finally to Jeff. Jeff, read us out.
As an economist, there are very few win-wins. Everything's a trade-off. This is a win-win. And I'll also add that we in the business community have a responsibility to show that the free enterprise system can solve social problems. What's good for business is also good for society, can be good for society. In this case, it is. And I think it's in all of our interests in the business communities to take on this responsibility.
Totally agree. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I want to thank our panelists. It was a terrific discussion. And, you know, let's go out in the world and change it, all right? This is great. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Please do us a favor and answer our exit survey. Safe and Just Michigan thanks you for participating in today's event. We'll be hosting more webinars soon, so please keep an eye out later in the summer and early fall. On the screen, we have included several ways that you can keep in contact with Safe and Just Michigan, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thanks again for participating in today's